On the 23rd of June of this year, the United Kingdom held a nationwide referendum on whether or not to remain in or leave the European Union. By now, almost everybody in the world has heard that the United Kingdom voted to leave the European Union, but nobody in the world knows exactly what that means. Looking at the data from the referendum and from previous votes, however, and we can acquire some likely results. Will the chaos surrounding this vote persist for years to come, or will things eventually settle down and normalize? We're not going to get into the politics behind why the vote happened. We're just going to look at the data and see what could happen next. First things first though, let's look at some of the history that led us up to this point. The United Kingdom first voted on European Union membership in 1975. The vote was approved by 67% of the voters then, and the United Kingdom has been a part of the European Union ever since. Well, until just now, or maybe it is still? This is where the haziness and uncertainty come into this whole situation. When the smoke cleared up on the morning of the 24th of June, the results came in. The United Kingdom has a population estimated to be around 65 million people. Out of that population, roughly 46.5 million people were eligible to vote at the time of the referendum. And out of that group, 33,551,983 people actually voted on the referendum. Therefore, we get a voter turnout across the entire UK of 72.21% of eligible voters. To put that number into a bit of perspective, this is the highest voter turnout of any vote across the entire UK since the general election in 1992. It is a higher turnout than any United States election since the 1900 general election 116 years ago. So, out of all the people who voted, we can see that 16,141,241 people voted to remain in the European Union, while 17,410,742 people voted to leave the European Union. These numbers translate into roughly 48% of people in the UK voting to remain in the European Union, while 52% of people voted to leave the European Union. Let's look at this data on a more regional level next. Excluding London for just a moment, the rest of England voted to leave the European Union with a roughly 55% majority. Wales also voted to leave with a narrow 53% majority. The rest of the United Kingdom voted to remain, and this is where things start to get messy. Starting with London, the only region of England to vote in favor of remaining, we see that nearly 60% of the voters there backed remaining in the European Union. This has led some to call for the secession of London from the UK and the creation of an independent city-state that would resemble Singapore, a city-state that would then rejoin the European Union. A petition to further this goal currently has nearly 180,000 signatures on it, but the odds of this ever happening are likely very small. The odds of another secessionist movement, however, are far many times more likely. To the north, we examine the data from Scotland. Here we saw a rough 67% voter turnout, and out of that population, an obvious majority of 62% voted to remain in the European Union, while 38% voted to leave. This is awkward, to say the least. If we remember, Scotland held a referendum just 2 years earlier in 2014 to decide if Scotland would become an independent country or not. In that election, there was a massive 85% voter turnout across Scotland. Out of that group, 55% of Scots voted to remain a part of the United Kingdom, while 45% voted to leave. Among the largest reasons why people voted to stay inside of the United Kingdom, however, was the fear that should they have left, Scotland would have found itself outside of the European Union and would be forced to reapply for its membership. This large concern is now irrelevant since the United Kingdom is going to leave the European Union, so the Scottish government announced the very next day after the election that government officials would be planning for a, quote, highly likely second referendum on independence from the United Kingdom. Many polls conducted in Scotland in the days since the referendum have found that support for leaving the UK may be ahead by as much as 7% over people wanting to remain now. We don't know if this second referendum will happen as of now, but if it does, it seems pretty likely this time that Scotland would leave the United Kingdom and seek to regain European Union membership, which would cause an awkward border in Britain itself. Would an independent Scotland use euros? Would there be an awkward border between Scotland and the remaining United Kingdom? How could people travel across? What would the UK flag turn into without Scotland? Would the UK even really exist at this point? We don't really know the answers to these questions, but let's cross over to Ireland to examine what the situation here looks like. Around 56% of people in Northern Ireland voted to remain in the European Union. That's a good majority, but since the rest of the UK voted to leave, they will be leaving as well. But this is awkward too, largely because the Republic of Ireland, which takes up the rest of the island, is a member of the EU and uses euros. While neither the Republic of Ireland nor the United Kingdom are a part of the European Union's Schengen area, they are part of what's called the Common Travel Area between their countries, which basically means that the border between the two parts of Ireland is essentially free and open with very minimal identity checks. You can freely travel across the border without needing a passport or stopping at any checkpoint, but that could change now that Northern Ireland will be leaving the European Union. The border here could become a land border between the UK and the EU and could end up becoming a really serious one. Hypothetically, another possibility is that of Northern Ireland holding a referendum to leave the UK altogether like Scotland and reuniting with the rest of Ireland. It's also unclear whether or not this will ever happen, but seeing as how Northern Ireland voted to remain, it will be interesting to see what will happen here. The final consequences are economic ones. Investors in the worldwide stock markets lost more than $2 trillion just on the 24th of June, which makes that the worst single day loss in all of history. By the 27th of June, the market losses had risen to $3 trillion, but by the 29th, the markets had mostly stabilized. The value of the pound sterling sank to its lowest value in 31 years, and this data could indicate that the United Kingdom might be heading towards a recession. Perhaps in response to these, there has already been a petition created to hold a second referendum that has been signed by over 4 million people at this point. Diplomatically, the UK government will have to eventually invoke Article 50 of the Treaty of the European Union in order to leave. The article itself says that any state wishing to leave the European Union will have to notify the European Council and will then be given 2 years from that date to negotiate a deal on their departure. Whatever deal is proposed must be approved by a majority of the remaining 27 EU member states and also by the European Parliament. If the two sides can't come to an agreement within the 2-year time frame, then the United Kingdom will basically be kicked out of the EU with no new trade agreements or provisions in place and will be basically left on their own. The time limit can be extended past those 2 years, but that decision needs the unanimous approval of all 27 remaining EU member states to do so. Nobody knows when the UK government will decide to invoke Article 50. They haven't invoked it yet, and no country has ever invoked it before. It could be a while before we see this happen. Overall, though, we don't really know what future the United Kingdom is heading towards. That's why there is so much chaos in the markets and in British political parties, because nobody really knows what is going to happen next. It could very well be the end of the entire United Kingdom as we know it, where we'll see Scotland breaking away and moving back in with Europe, or Northern Ireland leaving and being reunited with the rest of Ireland. Or none of these things will happen and the United Kingdom will stay together, united and separated from Europe. All we do know is that this will take years to figure things out, and that history never really does feel like history while we're living through it. Thank you for watching this video. If you are interested in more like this one, click the link in the top right to subscribe, like this video, and share it with a friend. Cheers, everybody.